Okay, morning everyone. Nice to see you all back. As you're aware that up to now we've been covering the face-to-face visit. So we've done clinic visit 1 and clinic visit 2. But today I just want to go through what the other visits are going to involve, and that's really the group visits. Okay, so just so that you're familiar as to what you need to be aware of when running groups. So the title, How to Run Group Session. It's really important to familiarize yourself with the topics of the group sessions, and all of this information is in your training manual. So it's important that you actually run through before you even think about running that particular session. I've listed the main topics that will be discussed in the various groups, but these I'm going to discuss in a bit more detail just further down this morning. So clinic visit 4 is focusing on fat. Clinic visit 5 is carbohydrates and trigger situations. Visit 6 is talking about food labels, eating out, pressures to eat. And visit 7 and 8, they're a lot more flexible. You might find by that time you know your groups really well, so you may have a topic in mind already that the group has suggested to you, or you might leave it open and just talk about sharing experiences as to what worked for some people, what didn't, learning tips from each other. That would be quite useful in visits 7 and 8. Oops. How to plan group sessions. Has anyone here done group sessions before? No? Okay. Group sessions can be real fun, but they can also be quite awkward depending on the kind of people you have in your group, because there'll be some people, you know, like when you're in a classroom, there's always one person who's difficult, or there's a joker. You know, there's a joker, there's somebody who's difficult, there's somebody who just doesn't want to be there. So you're going to get all sorts. You have to remember to look after everyone in that group. But the first thing when you're planning group session is location. Where are you going to hold that group? Because that's really important. It needs to be somewhere accessible for your participants. It's no good having it tucked away in the back of some school or anything that they're not easily accessible. Just make sure there's enough parking. So it needs to be accessible for the patients. The room needs to be suitable. It needs to be big enough. It needs to be well ventilated. It needs to have the right kind of lighting and stuff, the right number of plugs. So you need to make sure that it is a suitable room for your number of people you're having. Be aware of the noise that's going to be happening around, because sometimes you might have booked a room and then you realize later actually there's some building work going to be going on for the next month next to it, so that's no use. Okay, so do check on the noise or how quiet that particular room is going to be. Timing is very important in terms of when do you want to run the groups. You have to be aware, certainly in the UK, that a lot of people are going to be at work, and so it's not fair to ask them to take time off just to attend a group session. So you might find that to get the most attendees, you might want to run it at an evening, particularly perhaps after 6 when most people would have finished work, or alternatively have the option of actually running weekend groups. But that will be worked out individually as to what suits the participants, because the whole idea is to try and revolve around our best attendance. It could be evenings or it could be weekends. Room layout is very important because you don't want it to be a lecture. You want it to be interactive, and the way to achieve that is to make sure that the way you've laid out their seating arrangement is everybody feels involved. There's not like a teacher-student kind of relationship. I tend to find that when people are sitting around as opposed to in rows, it's better in doing group sessions. Equipment checklist, we often forget that because you think you've booked a room so everything is going to be absolutely fine, but you need to know for that particular talk or particular session what you're going to need. Do you need a projector? If so, make sure you have one ready. You make sure there's a wire long enough that goes to the plug. If there's a projector, make sure you've got a screen. So whatever you need in terms of resources, make sure you have that for that session. All the resources in terms of what you're going to need for particular sessions are in your trainer's manual. So in the trainer's manual, depending on which topic you're going to do, also has a list of resources you're going to need for that topic. So it's really important to check that before, make sure you've got them all ready prior to the session. And I wouldn't say like an hour before the session, make sure you have it ready a couple of days before, right? Make sure there are enough chairs. It can be quite daunting when you're only expecting 10, but they bring family members and then there are enough chairs, and then half the time you're spending looking for more chairs. The idea of these group sessions is really to involve the family members as well. So at your clinic visits 1 and 2, as we've mentioned, you were going to be encouraging family members to come. So hopefully, even if all of them don't bring family members, you might get a couple bringing family members. So it's important to make sure there are enough chairs for everybody in the room. So setting the scene. So as I've mentioned, seating arrangements need to be as informal as possible. U-shape is best, so that if you have anything you want displaying, it could be shown in the center, and you could be standing either on the side or in the center, depending on what you're talking about. But when they're in a U-shape, they feel more comfortable, okay? It's important, obviously, to welcome the group. I mean, you might know them individually, but you have to remember that in clinic visit 3, that's the first time they're meeting each other. So everybody's a bit shy. It's really important to make them all feel welcome. And before you start off with your session, and I personally, the way I've run sessions in the past, it's not just at the first visit, but at all the group sessions, it's important to break that ice because of the gap between the groups. It's just, again, to make them feel, oh yes, they know each other. So breaking the ice is really important to help the group process to begin and to make sure engage all the individuals. And we'll actually go through, what I mean by breaking the ice. Ask them to turn off their mobile phones. Every person nowadays has a mobile phone, and there's nothing more off-putting, both for you and for other people in the group, if somebody's phone is constantly going off or they're constantly on their phone. So just ask politely before you start the session, could everybody turn their mobiles off? This is going to happen. There will be latecomers. So the dilemma is, what do you do? Do you start the session as planned? Do you delay it? Use discretion? What would you all do?
Start on time.
You start on time?
Wait 10 minutes, 5 minutes.
Wait. Maybe I'm a bit cruel, but I tend to start on time, depending on how many are there. If you find that the majority of the people are there, then I'd start. But I would emphasize, for those that do turn up late, in a nice, polite way, to say, please try and make it here on time, because it does hold everything up. But at clinic visit 2, or in fact even at the letter that you're going to be sending out for them to be invited to the group sessions, we need to highlight that the time is going to start at a particular time and finish at a particular time. Because I know what some of our people are like. Timing doesn't mean very much. So if you say it's an hour session starting at 7, some people might wander in 7:30, 7:45. So it's really important to get the time factor right, because you don't want to be keeping those people that have made that effort to be on time to be hanging around. And you'll realize once we're covering the group session, there's a lot to cover in an hour. So if you wait 10 minutes, it's actually going to delay a lot of things. So personally, I would start the session as planned, if possible, if there are enough people to start with. And then as the people are the latecomers, include them as they've come in, but don't start from the beginning again. Just carry on from where you've started, and at the end of the session, come back to them and perhaps cover the aspects that you might have covered with the others. During the session, it is important to try and include all the participants. As I said, some people are going to be very shy, some people want to take over, some people are neither here nor there, but it's important to involve everybody, not just have one spokesperson. And you'll find that in most groups, there will be one very strong character who wants to lead or who wants to take over. Everybody needs to be given a chance to speak. And if you find somebody's actually not speaking, you actually need to pick on them. When I say pick on them, just very gently to say, what's your opinion or what do you think, that kind of thing, so they feel involved. And you will get people going off tangent. You know, it's common. If you start discussing a topic, somebody might say, oh, you know, on the TV yesterday, this is what happened. Did you see that? And everybody else then gets all excited and they start talking about it. But you need to lead them back because you have to finish your topic within a certain time. So lead the group back to the topic if things are going off track. At the end of each of the group visits, make sure all have set personal targets and goals, because if you remember, one of the most important things in this diet and lifestyle intervention study is to make sure goals and targets are set at each visit, and this includes the group sessions. So everybody, before they leave that session, they need to have set their personal goals or targets until their next group visit. Remind them to complete feedback forms. There will be feedback forms at the end of the group sessions so that they can give you comments, because you might find that the way you've run your session hasn't been very helpful for some, or they might give you very valuable comments as to, you know, could we cover this topic in a more detail. So make sure they give you back those feedback forms. Thank them for coming, because it's time out of their day, so make sure you thank them. And it is important to give a date and time for the next session. Okay, because then they can note it out in their diary. And if you remember from our training earlier on last week, that the gaps between the groups is roughly about 4 weeks. So this, at the end of the first group, is a 4-week gap, but there will be phone calls in between. So they're coming back as a group in 4 weeks' time, but you will be in touch with them between now and the next visit. So now it's just talking about each particular group as to what you're going to be covering, what the objectives are, and what you're going to try and get out of them. So as I've mentioned already, there are going to be 5 group sessions overall. Visits 3, 4 and 5 are themed topics, as I've already mentioned. 7 and 8 are very general, that you're going to be going through, and it's more of an opportunity to go through any concerns anybody has had, any tips they can offer each other, or any complaints, anything of that will be 7 and 8. Most group sessions, the way we've programmed, they should run maximum 1.5 hours, but it could be anything between 1 to 1.5 hours, depending on how many you have in your group. The idea is to have maximum 10 individuals or 10 participants in that group. You might find you're saying 10, but they might bring family members. It could turn out to be 20. Right? You don't know. There'll be some groups where only 10 will come, or 10 may not come, 8 will come. And there'll be other sessions where they bring their next door neighbor, they bring their best friend and their cousin. Right? Because suddenly somebody has said, oh, actually that is quite interesting, do you want to come along? But everybody should be made welcome. Okay? But you might have either 8 or you might have 20. You need to be aware of that. But as far as the invitations are going, the idea is to have maximum 10 people in the group, as far as you're concerned. Even at the group sessions, apart from setting the targets and the goals, you need to be doing the weight, the waist measurements, the waist and hip measurements at those visits when they're coming. And again, I have to keep emphasizing the fact that we need to set individual targets at the end of each session. So the first clinic visit, the first group visit I should say, which is clinic visit 3, is focusing on fat, and the objectives, as far as you're concerned as the trainer, is that the people that are going to be attending that session, they go away at the end of that session having learnt about the different types of fats, the sources of hidden fats, how to cut down on fats, and how to choose healthier fats. The whole idea of the group sessions is to actually make them very practical sessions, so that, you know, it's not what you've been telling them in clinic visit 1 and 2, it's actually something doable that they can go home and actually practice what they've been learning. So the overview, this is still clinic visit 3, so this is the fat one. So session overview, weight, waist, hip, goes without saying. Once everybody's settled, you introduce yourself and then ask participants to introduce themselves. That's an icebreaker. And, you know, for example, an example of an icebreaker is, you know, I would say to you, Lally, if you were a fruit, what fruit would you choose to be? I know it sounds really bizarre, but it gets a conversation going, because you might come and say, oh, I'll be a strawberry. And then I'll ask the person next door to you, what would you like to be? So it's just something to get people a bit of a smile, a bit of thing, oh, what's she on about? You know, just to get everybody getting more comfortable. It's important as trainers to follow the script. The script has been written, the script which you're going to be getting in the trainer's manual has been written having done the sessions. So there's a certain time frame, there's a certain types of topics you need to follow, so do be aware you're following the script. Target setting. So clinic visit 4, which is again obviously a group session, and the topics there that we need to be covering are carbohydrates, the different types of carbohydrates, and also the trigger situations. So the objectives is the people that are going to be in the session need to have learned about the different types of carbs in their diets, healthier options to help with their weight loss program. They need to have known or learn about the food plate model and how to cope with triggers and trigger situations. Okay, because trigger and trigger situations are really going to be very important for them to understand and help with them achieving their goals. And if you notice, you know, it's repetitive. Every group visit, it's the same thing you're doing over and over again, in the sense it's always the same weight, hip, waist. But one thing you should discuss at the beginning of so after the clinic visit 3, when they come at clinic visit 4, before launching into that particular session, it is important to actually go back to clinic visit 3 and discuss any problems they may have had last visit. Because sometimes those are really important to get out of the way before you've started the group. Again, follow script, set the targets. Visit 5, food labels, eating out, dealing with pressures to eat. Food labels is particularly important for those people that rely quite a lot on processed foods and eating out and so on. So in this session, they need to be aware how food labels work and how to eat healthily when eating out. Because obviously the whole point with this diet intervention program is, you know, you want to make it as flexible and as individualized as possible. So we need to try and educate the participants in terms of making the right choices. So that's whether they're eating out or on holidays or special occasions. Same overview. So you're doing the same thing at each visit: weight, hip, waist, problems, follow script. Going back to problems, there might be some sessions where people have lots of problems. And you know, you might find, oh my God, I'm not going to get through my topics. Don't worry, it's really important that you've actually sorted the problems out first. Make sure those have been discussed, those have been dealt with before you start the session. Even if you can't finish the session, don't worry, maybe you can do part of that session at the next visit. So keep it open, keep it flexible. And of course, then we come to the group sessions, which are not so strict in the sense you can talk about anything in a way, but the way I've themed it is clinic visit 7, lapses, relapses, because obviously that's one of the things people are going to be going through, you know, when they go off track, they come back, they go off. So it's really a discussion as to what works for some people, what doesn't work, you know, and talking about coping strategies when people do go off track. And visit 8, it's really a general discussion and sharing experiences, you know, personal problem solving. At this point, you might want to talk about recipes, or prior to this, you might want to ask them, perhaps even in clinic visit 7, you might ask them, you know, if anybody has tried out a new healthy recipe, do they want to share it with the rest of the group? And if so, that'd be really great. Could they bring it along with them? Not the cooked meal, well, they could if they wanted to, but they can bring the actual recipe and share it with the others in the group. And any tips they might have. So, you know, and again, that's a way of engaging the participants. One thing throughout the group sessions, I know the group sessions are being focused on diet, but please remember to mention exercise at each group session. It may be one of their targets from the previous session, but it's important that you remind them about activity is as important as following their eating plan. And you know, that needs to be reinforced each time. I mean, what I tend to do is when at each visit, apart from just going through diet problems, I always say, right, did you manage to do the exercise that you'd set yourself out to do? So make sure, and even at the end of the session, remind them, don't forget your exercise. That is just as important. So the exercise is part of the whole program. That's one of our targets. So it's really important to keep reinforcing that message to them. Any questions? Thank you.